Hello everyone, my name is Michael Downey and thank you for logging in today. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on warming and water deficit effects on Shiraz grapes and wine. I'd also like to welcome today's presenter, Marcus Bonada, a Senior Research Officer in Viticulture at the South Australian Research and Development Institute, or SARDI. In Argentina in 2005, Marcus completed a degree in agricultural engineering with a major in viticulture and enology. He has more than 8 years experience working as an R&D practitioner at the National Institute of Agriculture Technology in Argentina, and in 2004 completed a PhD at the University of Adelaide. Marcus's research has an emphasis on applied results, and the focus of his research lies in abiotic stresses, mainly water and temperature, affecting grape and wine composition and sensory aspects. He also has a strong interest in vineyard management options to mitigate potential impacts of climate change. His presentation today brings together his interests on the impact of water deficit in the vineyard and climate change effects. Now, before I hand over to Marcus to get us started, a couple of quick notes on what to expect for anyone that's new to AWRI webinars. The format for today is a very short PowerPoint style presentation followed by a Q&A. We encourage attendees to get involved and interact. So to ask a question, please type into the questions pane of your control panel in the bottom right corner of your screen. For those with access to a microphone or anyone that is dialed in, there is also the option of speaking with us directly by clicking the raise hand button. This is located in the top left section of your control panel. Questions will be answered at the end of the session, but please feel free to send your questions through at any stage. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Marcus now to help get us started.
Hello everyone there. Thanks Michael for the introduction and thanks AWRI for this opportunity. Today I'm going to introduce you some findings for a project that we run at SARDI with the main purpose of assessing the effect of warming and water deficit condition on Shiraz grape and wine composition. This project was run with some collaborators from SARDI, University of Adelaide and Treasury Wine Estate, and was supported by Wine Australia. Just to start, I would like to give you some short outlines of the topics and steps I will cover during the presentation. I will start giving you some general aspects of climate change that are relevant for grape and wine production, some background about how we came to these projects and the aims we pursue to achieve. And then I will talk about the effect of warming and water deficit we observe on grape development and some trait of grape and wine composition. I will finally give you a quick summary of all the main findings, some major implications for the industry, and some possible adaptation to mitigate negative effects of warming. I will focus in this part of the presentation only on changes in temperature and rain associated to climate change, since these were the climate factors that we directly manipulated in this field trial. And there are two major aspects of warming that are relevant for the wine industry. The first aspect is the mild long-term increment in mean temperature. The evidence shows that the air temperature of the globe has increased. As we see here in this figure, positive anomalies on temperatures have become more frequent since the 1980s, and the rate of warming globally during the last 60 years has been estimated around 0.01 Celsius degree a year. The second aspect, which is also associated to the first one, is the increasing incidence of heat waves. And in fact, short spell of high temperature has become more frequent and intense after the 1980s, together with this trend in warming. But despite this close association between this contrasting aspect of warming, it is important to differentiate the effects they cause on grapevine production to obviously understand and adjust management practices in the vineyard and the winery to reduce the negative effect. And the implication of these two distinctive aspects of warming in production are highly contrasting. A clear example of this is the unprecedented impact of the heat wave that occurred in southeastern Australia in the season 2008 and 9, when there were heat-related crop losses about 70% when the heat waves occur just before or at Verizon. And these pictures here that were taken by Lynn Webb in a survey she and her colleagues ran in southeastern Australia show some typical damages of heat waves. As we see here, some typical burning of shoot tips and leaves, berry desiccation in Shiraz bunches, and as well burn in berries of Chardonnay that of course were more advanced in development at the time that the heat waves took place. Impact of long-term increment in mean temperature are more variable between location and years. We could expect, for example, a higher probability of a negative effect of warming on grapevine in a hot environment than in a cold or mild environment. Likewise, for a given location, the effect of warming may be negative, neutral, or positive, depending on the traits and the background seasonal temperature. And to explain this, I have included this figure. Here, monthly mean temperature during 4 seasons are shown on a context of long-term record. The lines are the deciles, and the two more extremes represent the hottest and coolest 10% years for a period of 60 years at Nuriopa in South Australia. We can consider here two cases as examples to illustrate the effect of the background seasonal temperature on some traits. Let us start from September 2010. That was within the 10% coldest month in record, as warming in a cold year is likely to improve vine processes that occur during this period, such as, for example, bunch differentiation. And on the contrary, November 2009 and January 2012 that were over or in the 10% hottest month, thus warming on the top of an already warm condition is more likely to produce a negative effect. Let me say here, for example, during flowering in November or ripening in January for the Southern Hemisphere. But temperature is not the only climate factor important for grapevine production that has changed with climate change. There have been changes in the amount and timing of rainfall in parallel with warming. However, contrary to what is being observed with warming, where all the grape growing regions around the globe are being warmed up, changes on rainfall events are more variable between regions and years, and while some regions are being threatened by the reduction in rain, such as California on the recent years, others have experienced an increase on rainfall or maintained stable over the time. For Australia, however, the trend is more clear and rainfall is reducing, and it is shown here in this figure, which represent anomalies on rainfall during the last 60 years for southeastern Australia. There is a clear drying trend with a maximum decline on rainfall about 20 millimeters per decade from the 1980s. So in this context of warming and dry condition, we established a factorial experiment combining two temperature and two water regimes. Temperature treatment were controlled vine exposed to ambient temperature, and heated vine were in the heating vine, the air temperature at a canopy level was heated by approximately 2 Celsius degree during day and night. These temperature treatment were combined with two water regimes: well irrigated vine that were maintained without water stress during the season, and water deficit vine exposed to moderate to severe stress from approximal liberation to harvest. We use these chambers, as we can see in this figure, to increase temperature realistically in the field. These chambers are under canopy chambers that combine a passive heating system during the day and active heating system at night, pumping hot water using the pipes located under the chambers. So the trial was established in a Shiraz vineyard located at SARDI's research station at the Barossa Valley. And the experiment was, I will talk today, was run during 2 consecutive seasons. The main purpose of this trial was, as I said before, assessing the effect of warmer and dry condition on some aspect of berry development, like mesocarp cell death and shriveling, on the balance of berry quality traits, finally on wine composition and sensory attributes. I imagine that the majority of you are not familiar with the symptom of shriveling in Shiraz, but sorry, that the majority of you are familiar with the symptom of shriveling, but as it happened to me when I started to research about this topic some years ago, I had no idea about the physiological causes triggering the shriveling in Shiraz. And mesocarp cell death is a major contributor to shriveling in Shiraz. I have included these images here to show you what I mean when I refer to mesocarp cell death. And the picture here on the left shows this an staining section of a Shiraz berry, where everything in green is living tissue and in black dead tissue. Mesocarp cell death takes place in normally senescent berries and is common in many one grape varieties. And is, as I said before, mesocarp cell death is also associated with berry shriveling in some cultivars. For example, in Shiraz, shriveling increases together with mesocarp cell death, while Chardonnay berries are maintained turgid even when berry mesocarp cell death integrity is completely lost. And mesocarp cell death and shrivel occur late in ripening, when berries are around 20 to 23 bricks, and there are some negative and positive aspect associated to this to the shriveling and mesocarp cell death. Of the most obvious implication of shriveling is the decrease in yield, but it also produces an accumulation of sugar and increased potential alcohol in wines. But there are some positive side effect of mesocarp cell death, that is the enhancement of berry aroma compound later in ripening. So based on this background, the first question we identified was to what extent will warming and water deficit condition affect these two traits, mesocarp cell death and shriveling in Shiraz. And we found that both warming and water deficit increase mesocarp cell death and shriveling at harvest. However, the effects were additive, while warming advanced the onset, water deficit increased the rate. So at this stage of the study, we knew that these combined factors, water deficit and warming, accelerate mesocarp cell death, but also increase shriveling. And on the other hand, we also knew about the possible beneficial side of mesocarp cell death, increasing berry flavors and aroma in normally developing berries. So the second question here was how this contrasting effect of mesocarp cell death will contribute to the final balance of berry quality traits when temperature and water deficit are hastening berry development. So we approached this question assessing berry sensory attribute at harvest. We use a trained panel. We scored 20 sensory traits from the whole berry, from seed, skin, and pulp, using a continuous scale from 0, that represent unripe traits, to 15, that means fully ripe traits. And the first important finding was that traits typical of ripened berries with a higher score were associated with higher mesocarp cell death. And this is consistent with the practice of extended ripening, seeking to enhance the balance in quality traits. But we also found that combined warming and water deficit, decouple berry softness, juiciness, and pulp detachment were all traits or characteristic of high shriveled berries. And also accelerate seed and pulp ripening over skin ripening. So the question here was, we still have not much idea here if this decoupled trait will be detrimental or not for the wine quality. To some extent, more ripening seeds may favor wine composition because there is less tannin extractability, because that means represent a higher proportion of skin to seed derivative tannins, which are related with an improvement on sensory attribute due to the relative higher astringency and lower bitterness of tannins coming from the skin. But on the other side, we also knew that lower extractability in more ripened seed will reduce total tannin concentration in wine, that can be detrimental, of course, for wine extractor and aging. So to assess the impact of unbalanced sensory traits in berries on wine final composition, we elaborated wines from these grapes using a standard winemaking protocol. We measure phenolic composition in grapes and wine, and we also ran complementary chromatic and sensory analysis on 1-year-old wines. Under our experimental condition, when our high temperature and water deficit were combined, temperature overrides water effect on grain composition. I have highlighted this or made reference to this, highlighting this horizontal bar that represent the changes in temperature from heated to ambient temperature. I have included here, and I will keep talking about this principal component analysis, which we use as exploratory method to assess relation between treatments with the traits and between the traits. And heated and water deficit condition, heated and water deficit berries were more shriveled with a higher proportion of skin per berry, and on the contrary, well-watered berries at ambient temperature had higher mass, were more turgid, and with a higher proportion of pulp per berry. In opposition to heated and water deficit berries, which resulted with an overall lower phenolic content, Well-irrigated berries at ambient temperature were relatively more rich in phenolic substances. Therefore, berries had higher phenolic, total phenolics, total anthocyanins, and total tannins. However, the proportion of skin to seed derived tannin was higher in heated and water deficit berries, which is well in agreement what we found in the sensory study where seeds were advanced in ripening. These differences in grape phenolic composition did only partially translate into wine composition, where 1-year-old wines from vines at ambient temperature but under water deficit resulted with a higher total phenolic, total tannin, color density, and higher proportion of polymeric non-bleachable pigments. Here, possibly the concentrating effect of smaller berry by water deficit combined with the higher phenolic synthesis or lower degradation of phenolic substances at ambient temperature were the more likely driver of these differences in favor of water deficit berries but at ambient temperature. Wine from water deficit vine at ambient temperature also resulted with more color saturation. The wines were darker and with more red tones. Regarding the sensory attributes of these wines, panelists also found that this wine resulted higher in berry flavors, cup flavors, and with the higher tannin structure. So the typical effect of water deficit leading to colorful, phenolic-rich wine with a higher tannin structure and berry flavor aromas was only observed in ambient temperature treatments. So summarizing, warming and drought condition increased mesocarp cell death and shriveling at harvest, accelerated berry development, but decoupled sensory traits, and this was more obvious for the seed-related sensory traits. And the decoupling in sensory traits translated in a negative manner to the wine phenolic composition, where wine from heated and water-stressed vine resulted poor in color, in phenolic composition, and sensory attributes. So the first important implication is that warming will override water deficit effect on grape and wine composition, and this will be more evident in mild to hot years or in hot regions where an increase in 2 Celsius degree on top of a hot background condition will be detrimental for wine quality. Therefore, the effect of water deficit leading to colorful, flowersome, and phenolic-rich wine may not be whole under warming in a hot year. An overall implication of this is that the warmer and dry condition will alter the wine identity of a region and increase year-to-year variability unless some technological innovation are applied either in the vineyard or in the winery to counteract the negative effects. And in this regard, I have included here 3 main approaches that have been identified that may help to counteract this thermal effect in the vineyard and restore the equilibrium between sensory traits disrupted by elevated temperature. The first approach is by reducing energy load in the canopy, either directly by shading nets, sprinklers, or the use of sunscreens, or indirectly by varying the orientation and trellis system in new plantations. The second approach is by irrigation management practices that exploit the evaporative cooling ability of the canopy during ripening and maintain water status during periods of high evaporative demand, mainly during January, February for the Barossa Valley. And the third one is by shifting by development using chemical application, for example, auxins, that are not approved yet for Australia, or pruning practices such as delay pruning that move ripening to cooler conditions. I have included in this last slide some references where you can further read about these different techniques that are being studied. I will just to finish, thanks again AWRI for this opportunity, the listeners there for your participation. Here are my contact details, so please, if you have any question, send me an email or give me a call. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Marcos. From here, we'll roll straight into a Q&A. Marcos will stick around for a few minutes, so if you have any questions, please start sending them through now. Quick reminder, to send in a question, you can type your question in the bottom part of your control panel and click to send. If you have a microphone or you're dialed in on a telephone and you want to chat directly with Marcos, please click your raise hand button and I will unmute your microphone. So yeah, as I said, we'll stay on the line for a minute or so and see if we get any questions. In the meantime, just want to remind everyone about next week's AWRI webinar. This will be on the 17th of November, where the AWRI's Tadro Abbott will present an update around recent changes to the AWRI ferment simulator tool. For anyone that would like to register for that session, please visit the AWRI website. Okay, we've got our first question, so I'm just going to send it through to you now, Marcos.
Yeah, the question here from Tim is expand on timing of irrigation and timing of water deficit stress, pre-flowering, flowering, veraison, etc. Well, Tim, we try to be consistent on both seasons, even when we have different rain patterns that also affect the progression of stem water potential. I haven't included that because, well, I think that I have presented more than enough information, but what I can say, we pretty much maintain for well-irrigated vines, where in a non-stress condition pretty much during the whole season, while deficit vine were in a moderate to severe stress pretty much from veraison to harvest.
Okay, thank you for your question there, Tim. If you have any follow-ups, please send them through. Okay, looks like that may well be it with regard to the Q&A for today. Marcos did mention a number of resources on one of his slides. If anyone wants to get access to any of those papers, please do contact the AWRI library. If you have any further questions regarding Marcos's presentation, feel free to contact him directly as well. So I'd firstly like to thank Marcos for presenting today, and also thank everyone who logged in and attended. Attendees will receive an email with a follow-up with a link to the recording. There'll also be a link to a survey. As I mentioned, the next AWRI webinar is on the 17th of November. Tadro Abbott will be presenting some information around changes to the AWRI ferment simulator tool. That's all we have for today. Thank you again for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at the next AWRI webinar.